Hi, this is Peter Teuscher. I'm here with Toby Demker. Thanks for joining us for another podcast where we talk about personal and professional development, a little bit of philosophy. We pick a topic and see where the conversation takes us. So I'm interested in seeing where the conversation takes us today. How are you doing, Toby?
Yeah, thanks. I'm well, man. As usual. I hope you're well too. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Cool. So I've picked a topic today that, I was looking through the different things that we've chatted about, and because I had kind of been thinking about, I'm doing some writing that talks about relationships, and
Mm,
I didn't want to go back to another, even though it's a huge topic, but I've been thinking a lot about the connections that we have in life, in work, in everything, and through connection, I think of it in terms of how we connect to each other, how we connect to nature and the world around us, how
mm.
we connect to the work that we do. Connection is super important for us. And, when I think about it, and this will be a bit of a preamble, I think, for our conversation, but I've got a lot
Okay.
to say about it. But, when you look at from the time we are born, they say that, babies that aren't held or aren't touched, they die, or they have a higher chance of death. And
Mm,
even, there's studies that show that it inhibits the growth and development of a child if they're not held. And so I think from a very young age, that's our first sense of connection. That's how we're able to connect to others physically, right? And even as we develop and get older, there are, we look for independence from our family, and then but we still seek connections within our peers. And I think that's been this from a biological standpoint. It's evolutionarily we've succeeded through cooperation, and so on some level, that's probably where some of our need for connection comes from. But also on a mental and I'd say spiritual, at least spiritual relating to sort of that emotional side of us, we continue to seek connection. And I think we've all had experiences where we meet someone, we feel really connected to them. We had that when we first started working in China together, and this just sense of connection that you have. But also when you do work that you love, you feel this real connection to the work and the people who are involved in it. And when I go out into nature and I'm inspired by something, I just this I was just in Canada seeing some family, and my brother and I always go for a hike, and there was this real, I just really felt a connection to my surroundings, and so I think it's that sense of connection that we feel to people and to things that I really want to talk about today. And I think that when you talk about, we're all connected, everything's connected, but there are mammals that don't seek connection; they seek solitude, and there are probably a few individuals that prefer isolation as well. They're few and far between, but I question: are they achieving their highest potential and their highest happiness? Who knows? But like bears and skunks, and I only recently came across that fact that skunks are solitary animals. So there are mammals that prefer solitude, but I think that for the most part, human beings need that sense of connection in many different ways. And so, sorry, that's my preamble. That's what I'd like to talk about today. What do you think? And you're on. Sorry, we had a little bit of a glitch there, audio glitch, and we're back. So anyway, Toby, you were about to respond to my little preamble. What do you think?
Yeah, okay. Well, so my first initial feeling is just wow, it's an overwhelming topic, right? It's so much that we could talk about here. I mean, you started to talk about mammals and human beings and human touch, and I mean, because everything we work with is related to this. Whether it comes to coaching, when it comes to facilitation, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to organizational behavior, sociology, uh, finance, biology, everything. We can talk go in any single direction here. Um, what I started thinking about was two things. one, and this is something that has also been on my mind lately. Like me and a colleague, we've been discussing like what makes a really good facilitator. Because a lot of people might think that it's about expertise in a topic or whatever, but more and more me and this person that we've been talking about this, we feel like it's really about understanding and managing these connections to feel what's happening in the room and to be able to manage the process around that. And that's a very sort of implicit skill. It's very difficult to say what it is, but there is something about those connections that you have to be really agile and nimble and sort of sensitive about. So I think it's really interesting to think about it from that perspective. So that's one way. Another thing, one, I was in a workshop just, was it 2 weeks ago? And we did a thing around networking and how we think about networking from lots of various different perspectives. Your professional network, the network that you would like to have, your private network, how you manage it, how you utilize it. And that's also around connections, where how you yeah manage and yeah, connect with people and perhaps utilize it as a resource or as a source of inspiration or whatever it might be, right? So yeah, I saying that I don't know where to begin. There's so many ways we could take that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there and there are pros and cons because some people feel really connected to a certain time of their life and they have trouble letting go of that. You see people that whether it's their fashion choices or the music they listen to, they feel really connected to a certain era of time, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
They wish, oh, if only I was born in the Renaissance, or if I was
Mm.
born in the '60s, or lived in the '60s, born in the earlier than that. If you have these things that you feel connected to, and it's interesting to think, why do we feel so bonded to that?
Mm.
But I think probably the main thing are these connections to people. We talk about, obviously I talked about the connection to nature and your work, but let's maybe start with the human connections, right?
Mm. Okay.
Because I think when you think about when we met in China and we were having all these conversations aside from the workshops we were doing, that was there was that we were, I think it's a we felt a sense of connection there in our interests, but
Mm.
also we're both very connected to the work that we do. Right? We
Mm.
feel very connected to it feels like we identify with it, and I think connection is the only way that I can describe it. So
Mm.
there's the work aspect, and there's the kind of feeling like, yeah, we've got a lot to say to each other, sense of connection, right?
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, I think that human connections, it's the most important thing. I think relationships is the thing that defines our lives in so many ways. It helps us grow and so on. And so the people we choose to connect with, do we feel that on what level do we feel that connection?
Mm.
Is it a mental connection? Is it an emotional one? Is it, some people just have lived very pragmatic relationships where, well, that this person's useful to me, and so that's why they're my friend or my
Yeah,
partner or
exactly.
whatever. But I think what we need is that deeper sense of connection. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah. I agree that the what I'm not questioning, but what I'm thinking about right now is like, yes, it's important to make connections, and it sounds like sometimes you just have it, if
Hmm.
it's common interests or a common personality, or I mean, as you said, for us as an example, yeah, we felt some sort of connection very quickly because we have a lot of commonalities, I would say.
Hmm.
But so I'm starting to think like, can you create this connection? And what if we were very different? How can you create a connection with someone? And also then, if you can create a connection, how can you do that while regaining or keeping your authenticity and your integrity? I think that's a really interesting issue. I mean, imagine a salesperson we have the stereotype for this for the salesperson who might be really good at connecting with anybody, but perhaps losing that authenticity, and by that maybe losing a bit of trust. Or if you see another side of the person, like, oh, who is this guy really, right? But
Yeah.
to be able to create these kind of connections genuinely, I think
Mm.
that's something that I'm interested in.
Absolutely right, because there's a certain American, former American president that was said to really connect with his audience, and then really caused a lot of division. No, we won't go into that, but
Mm.
I think there is a way to create connection authentically, and it definitely is shows up in the work that we do, right? When I have a coaching client, there needs to be a connection there. That
Mm.
I always try to, let people have a, wherever possible. I try and do a 15-minute just kind of get to know each other to make sure
Mm.
I'm the right person to coach
Like a
the
chemistry
person who
call. Yeah.
exactly. So
Mm.
so really, feeling a sense of connection, but what we do as coaches, I'm not sure how you go about doing it, but for me, one of the first steps is building rapport, right?
Mm.
So, and you do this in sales as well. You want to find some commonality. There's your body language and so on. There's
Mm.
lots of different ways to try and, create that feeling of rapport, of connection with someone. And I think when you're doing it in a coaching environment, it's making that other person feel comfortable enough to be authentic, right?
Mm.
Authenticity is a really important word that you said there, because especially in coaching, I think the successful coaches know how to do. It's not just about the tools you bring to the table, and the theories and that you can apply to any given situation. If there's not that kind of connection and trust there, and trust is a big builder of, when you naturally feel like you trust someone,
Mm.
it enhances the ability to make a connection, I think.
Mm.
So I think when we work as coaches, that I try to be authentic. I think, and I think that when you allow a degree of vulnerability there, it allows a connection to, you let your guard down.
Mm.
You're able to be more authentic. You're able to be more, yourself. There's less of a facade and a
Mm.
role that you're trying to play, I guess.
Mm.
So I think, yeah, authenticity plays a really important role, and creating that, I think, is something we do naturally. And I think the other point that you were making, I think it's an intuitive thing, right?
Mm.
I think we naturally have evolved to make connections, and so if we allow our intuition to guide us, then I think it'll be easier. And some people you just don't feel a connection to, and and we've talked about this before, that the on the conscious level of awareness is only a fraction of what's really happening in our consciousness, in the
Yeah.
unconscious, right? So
Mm.
so there's a lot of wisdom that comes from there. There's a lot of knowing, and I think that's where, for me, that's where the sort of intuitive impulses come from.
Mm.
So I think probably working from a sort of deeper intuitive level helps facilitate some of that connection, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I guess I mean for me it's also really about taking a sincere interest in the person, but that takes a lot of energy. I mean, I'm an introvert, so sure I like to connect to people, but if I really connect with people, like in my profession, it it's very energy sort of draining. I get really tired of facilitating or coaching for a full day, so when I come home, I need to relax a little bit. And it's the same thing in social settings. But I wish I could sort of turn it on more in my just my social life or private life, and try and work more to be creating connections, constructively creating connections. But I think it's something that for at least for me, it's something that I need to really turn on and think about. And when I step into that role, it's about taking a really sincere interest in the person. And sometimes I feel like if there's a person who I can't naturally connect with, I become even more. sort of curious about it and want to make more of an effort to do it. And I don't know what's going on there, but I think it's really about just being curious about, what do you, whatever it is, if it's hobbies or interests or personality or stuff. But it's I do think it is possible to create sustainable connections with people that are very unlikely minded from what you are, and I think that's a really beautiful thing as well.
Yeah, and I think that's something when you work with people on whatever your kind of work you do, and when you try to cooperate with people, and I think it's important to find ways to connect with people. And I think you're right that a degree of curiosity and openness is really important if you want to make those kind of connections. People who are very set in their ways, very rigid, will find it more difficult to make connections. And if you're only looking to connect with people who have the same ideas as you and exactly the same values, you're going to really limit the amount of people that you can sense a connection with or really connect with. I think I think there's a degree of tolerance that's important there, but also just this openness and curiosity. I think that's a really good point that you make, that when you have those, it becomes a lot easier to connect with other people. And trying to meet people where they, I mean, as coaches, this is what we meet people where they are now, right? We on their journey, we have to, it's not like come to me with and elevate yourself and come to me with, then you don't need a coach. It's really about coming to them and going, okay, this is where you are now, and how can I accompany you on your journey. I think the same sort of thing when you're trying to work with people, meeting them where they are or meeting people halfway or whatever, that can be a really important skill. So when you learn to, I hadn't even thought about talking about this today. I was thinking more about these natural connections that we feel, but I think you're right. I think it's an important skill to learn. And when you work in sales, it's really important. When you work in the kind of work that we do in coaching and doing workshops and so on. But I think in everyday life, in order to get by, in order to be able to cooperate with others, finding ways to make those deeper connections. And I think it's something you allow to happen, right? Because yeah.
And that brings in maybe another aspect of it, or an additional aspect of it. When we talk a lot about complexity, right, and the complexity of things in systems thinking or systemic thinking or whatever we want to call it. But there, it's really also to understand, but not manage the connections, right? To understand that there are connectivity about different parts in the system, in an organization, in whatever you're looking at. But if it's a very complex system, that it's nothing that you can really manage, right? You can observe it and you can see what happens and how they interrelate and try to perhaps amplify certain aspects of the system, but you can't really manage it. So, and that's something that I know that you're interested in this as well. But how fascinating that is in terms of watching the whole globe and how things interrelate and what happens between different connections and the side effects of things. And I think it's just a phenomenon to observe and see, okay, what's going on here? And that awakes a lot of interest in. I mean, it can be political situations, it can be geography, it can be politics, but yeah, it's...
Yeah, I think there are so many different levels you can connect with people on, because if it's not just, we always think it's someone we can relate to, but there are people that I can't relate to the kind of lifestyle they live or some of the opinions that I have, but I find other ways to connect on different levels. I have, people who I consider friends, who there are certain things that I just cannot relate to, some part of their lifestyle or opinions that they have. But then there are other things that we really connect on. Someone who some of the guys I play basketball with, when it comes to, our connection is the sport, as the game we love to play, right? But then, other things about their other interests or so on, there's no connection there. So I think that like you say, I think you can find a connection with almost anyone if you are open enough to it, right? So.
And yeah, and I guess what you're saying is you connect on different levels, right? You
Yeah.
can connect on multiple levels from maybe a single one, but it's interesting to find that how what's our connection? And isn't there a saying like you can reach anybody on the globe with like five, what is it, within 5 rings of your network or whatever?
It's called 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
6 degrees of separation. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, within your network, and this is totally, when you use something like LinkedIn or, different kind of networking tools, and you realize that, you're just 1 or 2 degrees removed from, everybody in even the people, your friends, from the network that your friends have or your associates have. You realize there's only a 2nd or a 3rd degree separating you and the connection to someone else. So I think it's a very healthy thing to recognize that how interconnected we are and how interdependent we are, because I think that the thing that feeling separated and isolated, not only is it not good for your mental health, I think obviously that sense of connection that we seek is part of good mental health, but also in terms of cooperation and sort of getting rid of some of the conflicts that we feel that we have in the world would be reduced if we could find more ways of connecting and recognizing that on some level we all have something in common, right?
Yeah. I'm thinking now, when you feel this sense of connectivity with something, so what? What do you do about it? Right? So what I mean is, so in what way is it useful? Is it just an emotion that you have, or is it something that motivates you, or is it actually? I mean, obviously, it's not a physical thing unless it's a human touch, right? But so what do you do with these connections when you find them?
Yeah, well, even the human touch can cause, if you're being touched by someone you don't want to be touched by, it causes the opposite of a connection, it causes revulsion and so on. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think what to do with that, I think first of all, recognizing that, much like my definition of intuition is, I think we've done a session on this before on intuition. My definition of it is a little bit different than the scientists who think of it in terms of the human heuristics and these shortcuts and these biases that we have that we kind of they're these internalized automatic responses to things. Intuitively, I think it's we talked about the unconscious. Unconscious has a lot more knowledge and wisdom, and so it communicates with us through feelings, right? And just in the same way that your body, you feel pain, it's communication that something's not quite right. And I think this is just another form of internal communication. So this, what we're calling connection, the sense of connection that we feel, I think is like some kind of an inner signal that's telling us, okay, this is a good thing. Pursue this. It's kind of this inner signal that's guiding us towards, okay, this is an interaction or a relationship that's beneficial to you, right? So I think that sense of connection is just from the unconscious telling us that, look, this isn't a well-developed theory that I have, but, my kind of intuitive response to it is that it's a signal from within that, this is a helpful connection for us in the same way that, and look, I have no scientific basis for this, but, the way our dopamine system works, it's actually, it's not necessarily this reward, for things, because the reward doesn't come after. It's the anticipation. It's this ways of, I've heard a evolutionary biologist talk about it. we recognize where we found some food, piece of fruit or whatever, and next time we see, or when we have anticipation of finding that, then we get more dopamine, and it kind of reinforces that, this is something that's good for us, or this is something that's helpful for us. So that anticipation of something, that's where the dopamine comes from. And so it could be a very similar biological function. I don't know, but certainly on a mental and sort of an emotional standpoint, I think when we sense connection, it's a signal that's telling us, okay, this is something that's beneficial to us. This is something that we should pursue further. We can, this is something that's going to help us in some way, whether it's our own growth, evolution, or it's some kind of a cooperation and collaboration that will bring us further. So I think the sense of connection is a beneficial inner signal that tells us, that's a guidance for, this is someone I should do more with. This is someone, if I'm not feeling the connection, if that feeling is missing, okay, move on to the next one. I think that's my take on it. That's just my gut feeling.
Yeah. And gut feeling, I mean, I get the sense, and I agree that it's really strongly connected to intuition. And we've talked about intuition before, but it's like an indicator for, what's your gut feeling, or what you think is right or wrong. And it's a few thoughts here. I mean, if you think of, a lot of people are, say religious, and you feel, I feel a connection with God, and some people do not feel any kind of connection with God. So, and obviously, well, if is the connection real or not? We don't know, right? But we make it real to ourselves. It feels real. It's my intuition is saying that this makes sense to me. It's an indicator telling me, yeah, this is something that you should sort of go with. The other part is, I'm definitely not a neurologist or anything either, but it seems like there is research, from what I've understood, that so if you have a certain amount of ideas or thoughts, or a sort of energy level in your ideas, there is a connection out externally with that as well. So other people can kind of feel that and connect with that somehow. How that works, I don't know, but it seems to be a lot of research in the field of neurology that is tapping into that right now, and that's really interesting. Imagine if we can actually measure that somehow, that what you're thinking has a direct impact on me if we're having that kind of connection.
Yeah, and we know that if someone in the room is in a poor state, or is in a bad mood, it's almost like there's this energy in the room, right? So. I haven't seen research on how that affects people. And again, it's, science is often, in some cases, science is trying to catch up with these things we intuitively know or feel, or sometimes it's confirming things that, indigenous people have had in their culture. And so, again, for the purposes of our discussion, I think, it's less about proving. In some cases, I like to have the evidence and so on, but I think if you can demonstrate in your own life that it's important to you, just like with beliefs, I used to think, it's got to all be factual, but I think if you believe something that's in your that helps you, that's in your best interest, like in the same way that there are, you talked about the feeling the connection to God. Well, for other people, there are atheists who who feel connection to things, and I think it's a signal of, could be a signal from your brain saying, this information doesn't make sense to me. I don't connect with this material, right? And so, or in some cases you do. So some people, they really have this connection to religion, and it helps them and it benefits them. And maybe that's an inner signal that this is a set of beliefs that's beneficial to you. Whereas someone who doesn't connect with it, again, we can talk ourselves into things and out of things. I'm not saying there's motivated reasoning and there's reasons we want to believe. But I think in terms of what we feel connected to, if it feels good, I wouldn't say it's always the case. If it feels good, do it. But I mean, for some people, drugs can feel good, and I'm not, that's not necessarily the answer. But I'm saying if that sense of connection is there, is probably a better guidance system than if it feels good, right? If intuitively this feels right for me, it's better than just the pleasure seeking of sense of feeling. If that makes any sense.
I guess, but I think it could be bad as well. I was thinking about then when we started talking about connections, like, do you have, can you rethink a situation in your life when you've had sort of bad connections and you've made choices that you felt like, oh, I was in search. Let's take an example of, like, I will say kids getting into gangs or something like that. You know, you as you said, we're all human beings. We're looking for relations all the time, so we want to be in some kind of group or in some kind of context where we feel appreciated and etc. So then we start seeking connections, and if one connection doesn't work, or maybe I'm talking more about relationships, and it's not necessarily the same thing. But if we're in a group and we feel excluded from there, we might start to seek for various groups that might not be very healthy for us. Getting into some gangs or, I don't know, drugs or just bad things. Right?
Yeah, I think there are unhealthy connections. I absolutely agree with you. And just like I was saying, some people feel connected to a point in time. I don't think living in the past is healthy. I don't think it's beneficial. So you may feel this real, and it depends on how you respond to it, right? So if you really resonate with a time that you're not living in now, I think it's a good thing to question whether that's the right thing to you, even if you feel that connection to it. So
exactly. Sorry, that might be just the, again, creating some awareness. I mean, we come back to this all the time, but creating that consciousness of what is this connection telling me? I mean, we can see numerous of examples of people getting in relationships that they shouldn't get into, right? Maybe because they're lonely or they're sad or they find a temporary solution to make it feel a little bit better, and you kind of find some kind of connection there. But is it sustainable?
Yeah, but this is where I come back to your point, which I thought was really important and really, really good, is this the question of authenticity, making authentic connections. Because a lot of people want to try and create, if they don't have a good family life, they will look to recreate that sort of family connection within other people. And this is where, you made the reference to gangs. I think for some people it feels like family. It feels that like that unquestionable loyalty that's expected of you and given in some cases, I guess. I've never been in a gang. I don't know. But there are these things that we're seeking connections. And if there's not that level of authenticity there, if it's fear driven, right, then, I've talked before, and this is a fundamental part of my philosophy is, when we act out of fear, it will take us down the wrong road. And what we think is connection, it's someone who's looking for love, through all the internet dating or whatever means that people try and seek that connection. I think this is the thing we when I think about something like online dating, right? If we're going to talk about romantic connections, and you find, and I know that some people have found good relationships out of that, or what they define as good relationships, but you have a lot of facts, right? You have a photo, which may or may not be accurate. You have a bunch of facts that someone has sort of described themselves from probably a very positively skewed, kind of description. How do you know if? And some people will think, oh, I totally connect with that person because there are the words that you're picking out, and there's something about the photo they've presented. But you really won't know until you meet them. And what is it then when you meet them? Is it those same things? Is it is it the information you read and the photo that you saw, or on an intuitive level, do you feel you either feel connection or you don't? That's why you would I'm sure this has happened where people will decide to get married without ever having met each other.
Sure.
They can't rule anything out. And then I'd be interested to know what their sense of connection. But it's all relative, right? What have you experienced up till now? If you have these healthy relationships throughout your childhood, and you sense this, sense of healthy sense of connection, so I think, and I've heard lots of theories about this, that we often seek the kind of, we define love, or we seek relationships based on our, the way we learned relationships are in our childhood. Again, you probably have to talk to a psychologist about this. I'm just going by sort of my own experiences and the things that I've read and learned, but I think that could be where a lot of things go wrong, where in terms of what we judge as a true connection. Sometimes it's just a familiarity. But I think when you have these deeper connections, like when you find something that you really love, that you're passionate about, whether it's music, or whether it's some kind of vocation, or whether it's working with people, you really feel connected to the work you do, then you compare that to something else that's kind of this fleeting kind of interest that you have, that okay, you liked it, you liked that last year, but this year you don't anymore. Those aren't that shows you the contrast in what's a real connection, authentic connection, and what's just kind of passing interest, right? You can say that about jobs that you've had, or relationships. We try and talk ourselves into things a lot of times, right? Use this motivated reasoning to try and, because there's something we're searching for, we try and find it in something. And I think this true sense of connection is when you don't need to convince yourself; it just comes, right? I think this discussion is, I'm learning as we go too, because I think this whole discussion is about clarifying. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it today, not because I think I have all the answers, but it's something that intrigues me.
How could we claim that we have all the answers?
No, nobody does, but exactly. So I think
I'm also thinking, like, how you feel connected with a place, for instance. I mean, it is very much based on experiences. I mean, I can feel very much, and I think mountains, for me, it's a very spiritual place. I don't know if it's when you're up in the mountains, you feel the vastness of earth, and you might feel very small yourself, and you can really feel a connection with everything around you, like with the planet, maybe with the universe, or right? But also, if I'm, for instance, I mean, you know that I spent like 20 years in China. I can feel a real connectedness with, like, the earth in China. There's a certain smell to it. There's a certain texture to the earth. There's a special dryness to what I'm thinking about, and that gives me. I feel. I mean, I'm not Chinese. I haven't grown up in the Chinese culture or anything, but I can really feel a connection with a place, with a geographical place, and to a large extent also the culture of China, of course. And at the same time, in Sweden, this is where has been growing up. Like, when I go into a lake in Sweden, I can taste what it's like, the minerals, and the dirt and the earth, and like, this is, for me, this is what it tastes like, or feels like, or smells like, and it's a really strong bond. But that's, I mean, what creates that? Is it just my experience, or is it something that I'm looking for because I share this with people that I grow up with, or, like, what creates this connection?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question, because I've had that experience in many cases as well. I mean, I felt a real connection when I met my ex-wife, and we got divorced. We did have a really deep connection. I also, so I still think that was authentic. I've had other relationships where I kind of felt like, there's a real connection. But I realized in hindsight, I was really I was working hard to find it. I was
No.
trying to talk myself into it. But then things like where you mention you love the mountains. I love being near the ocean, the sea. It's not. Okay, well, I grew up in Vancouver on the Pacific, so maybe that's part of it. But it's being near the sea is. I love being in nature, so I like being in the mountains as well. I've been to Tibet and I've been to Everest base camp, and in Peru to the Machu. All of that, I really loved it. But at the end of the day, I feel really connected when I'm at the sea. And before I'd been to Hamburg, the first time I live in Hamburg. So the first time I came to this city, it was in like right away. I felt this connection to the city. I hadn't been here before. I don't have any family or relatives or any kind of emotional connection to the city, and yet it just felt like the right place to be. And I still love being here. And it wasn't that I didn't leave Vancouver because I didn't like it or anything. I felt like there's this time to this time to venture out and find new connections, sort of thing. And I found that in Hamburg. And if it wasn't here, I'd probably look for another city to live in. So I think again, who's to say where that sensation comes from, or the familiarity? And from a spiritual set, my own philosophy, I have have beliefs that other people may not share. But I read an interesting book years ago, and I didn't believe in any of this stuff. But I read a book by Dr. Brian Weiss, and he talks about he did a lot of regression therapy with people. And then eventually, past life regression. So if you're a Buddhist and you believe in reincarnation, and you in some way believe in past lives, who knows? Maybe that familiarity stems from that kind of a connection. Not telling anybody what to believe, but I've been fascinated with the topic, and I wouldn't say it's out of the realm of possibility, but that's just my philosophy. So you asked me, what do I think about where those connections come from? And who knows? Maybe there's something on that level, or it might just be a neurological connection to something you experienced positively that you don't even remember. But when you say that connection to China, yeah, I wonder. Maybe you had a past life.
Yeah, could have been. No, yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know if we're getting any wiser by this conversation, because it's so we can go at it from so many different angles, and it's very abstract, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's very, very interesting to think about, because I think you began with this, that it seems like basically, well, let's say the vast majority of human beings are looking and feeling looking for and feeling some kind of connections with other people, with other stuff. And what does that really mean? And how can we understand it better? What does it mean to us? It's a very philosophical.
Yeah. I think it's something that's really worth considering, and again, that's why I wanted to discuss it. Not because I was going to share a lot of insightful opinions on it today, but because
no, you have a lot of good insights.
Because I really love to have these conversations and see how it. See how my sort of take on things can evolve from there. But definitely, we notice when those connections are missing. We might feel lonely, or we might feel apathetic to our work or whatever. And so I think just as a guidance for us, recognizing when we feel connection and when it's missing, or when we're trying to create it artificially and can't get there. I think it's worth reflecting on and worth thinking about. And I think to ask yourself, do I really feel connected to the work that I do? Do I feel a connection to the company or organization I work for? Do I feel a real connection to the partner I have, or the friends I have in my life? I think those are important things that may be uncomfortable to ask yourself. But I think the more fulfilling life is one where you feel real connected to what you do. You feel really connected to the people around you, to the city you live in, and not everybody has the luxury to pick up and move. I recognize that it's a real privilege. The fact that I was able to move countries, not everyone's able to do that. Fortunately, with my family and my parents put me in a position that I could do that. So, but I think though in those areas that you have control over, where you don't feel a real connection, it's time to go looking outside that, that bubble, that circle, and at least then you'll have some contrast, you'll have some comparisons, because when you find a real connection to things, I feel a real connection to expressing myself in writing. So this podcast thing is really taking me out of my comfort zone. Still, I like to talk too, but I think the work that I do, I feel connected to. I have people in my life I feel a real strong connection to. I live in a city that I have feel connected to. And I think if you're missing those things, you're not fully living, right? And that's just my opinion. And I wouldn't, if someone doesn't feel like something's missing, I wouldn't urge them to look for the deficits. But that's my lived experience, and that's why I think connections are to think about them, to get in touch with that sense of connectivity, even that connection to something in yourself. The spiritual, religious people, they feel this connection to something higher, and people who are atheists, which I considered myself for a very long time, maybe don't feel a connection to some higher power, but I always felt a connection to nature. So I think having some essential connections in your life really really has a lot to say about the quality of the life that you live and your own mental health and well-being.
Yeah, I mean, considering, I mean, for us as coaches, of course, it's something that is really interesting to explore in our coaching conversations. Just asking about what is the coachee's connection with the various topics, and it might create a lot of clarity for our motivations, what are our interests, what do we want to do, career choices, etc. But also realizing how individual it is. I remember we talked in some other conversation, we talked about art, and we can look at the same piece of art and the same painting, but we can have very different connections to it, and it may speak to you, but not at all to me. What's
exactly
right?
Exactly.
So make it your own, and understanding what it means for you.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Not judging the connections other people make or what they feel connected to. The diversity of experiences and ideas is what makes life so rich. So sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. You had something else.
Yeah, no. And then the last part, I think it's really important for leaders. I mean, we work with leadership development, but to understand. I mean, we talked so much about relatedness, purpose, connected. So how can you make sure that the people that you're working with are feeling some connection to what you're doing with a task, with the people that they're working with, maybe with the organization? I mean, we're talking about engagement on so many different levels here, but it's all in these connections. These implicit things that you can't see.
Exactly.
And so it's truly interesting, and there's a lot that we can do to perhaps enhance and strengthen these connections between each other. But it takes an effort, right?
Yeah, I agree. So I think maybe that's a good place to wrap it up. I've it's kind of unwound here, like this whole conversation, but listen, I think if anything, I hope that those who've persevered and listened through to this point we've encouraged you to consider your connections more deeply, and consider the things that you some people feel a connection to things, and then they're practical and they go back to the norms or the expectations that others have, and I think the things that we're drawn to, there's a reason for that sense of connection to that thing, and it's worth exploring. I'm not saying, you feel connected to something, throw away everything in your life and pursue it 100%. But I think just exploring the things that we feel connected to and thinking about them more deeply. And if we're missing those connections, that could be why, you're not feeling good about life, or you're not feeling as happy as you should be, or you want to be. And so, yeah, it's worth considering the connections that you've made with everything from people to situations to nature to whatever. So, yeah, let's leave that there.
Sure, yeah. Let's go connect with our lunches.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, listen, Toby, thanks for indulging me on this in this conversation that was a little fuzzy, went in a few different directions, but I for me it was really engaging, and I hope for those listening as well.
Yeah, same here. Likewise. Thanks.
All right. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you soon.